The fact of the matter is that we have together reduced the deficit in California significantly. And I know the governor talked about his first year appropriately and the operating deficit from 20 billion to 5. As I said on the floor yesterday, I know when I started in 2009 it was 42 billion, and now it is 13. And so let's recognize that through some very painful decisions that together we are chipping away at this thing at great cost. And I think that's really the point of departure here. A January budget is a January budget. It's what it is. The governor has an obligation to present it. He has an obligation to present real solutions, but I've been around now long enough to know that a January budget is never even close, most of the times, to the final product. And while he suggested a series of cuts, and especially cuts to the safety net, I'll be very clear, and I said it yesterday, the majority party, at least in the Senate, and I won't speak for Speaker Perez, but we have talked. We are not interested in making cuts to CalWORKs and child care or public education or any of these other categories early in the year. Cuts should be a last resort. And the reasons, ought to be self-evident from what we argue and from our value system. If you look at the numbers, this is the most revealing number to me. The LAO projected, the legislative analysts projected, that California's revenue this year would be $86 billion. They do 5-year forecasts, and when you look back to November of 2007, they projected that this year our revenue would be $132.9 billion. So that is a huge change in really the face of California and in the role of public investment. And most of that difference, of course, has been accomplished through difficult cuts across every single area. And the cuts themselves not only have an impact on people, they have an impact on the economy. Look at childcare, for example. The whole purpose of CalWORKs, which is not welfare, by the way. It's the most renowned assistance to work program in the country, and it's one of the few state programs where there isn't a huge growth curve because it's actually succeeding in putting people back to work. You take away child care, that adult who's the recipient then probably cannot go to work. Counterproductive. And so in the end, you make cuts, and we've made cuts in these areas because we have had to. So unless and until we get to that point where we have to, we ought not to inflict any more damage on people and the economy. And here's why you can, I think, credibly say that the cuts are premature. Between November of 2011, I get the date right, I don't know the exact date, November of 2011, when the legislative analyst came out with its revenue projection for purposes of the December trigger decision, and December, when the Department of Finance came out, there was a $1.5 billion difference on the upside. Now, if that kind of trend continues even in a more modest fashion, that $6 billion deficit, that's the remainder after you subtract out the revenue measure for November, can be knocked down, and can be knocked down considerably to a point where the kind of cuts that are called for in the January budget are not necessary. So look, I'm not going to overreact because it's a January budget. Governor, did what he had to do. Now, of course, constitutionally, the ball shifts to us. We'll convene budget committee right away. We'll begin analyzing all the proposals. There are a few things that, because we only had about an hour to review it, that ought to be brought to light that are positive. He calls for a number of agency consolidations and department consolidations. And there are some things in here where we can take some action early. to improve the effectiveness of government, but not the cuts.
Sorry, when you say cuts we put off.
I'm sorry?
You go.
The governor, he wants these in March. He wants these implemented. So that's not going to happen, is what you're saying.
We're not going to make those cuts to CalWorks or child care in March. No.
Are you open to, whether you do them in March or you do them eventually, you're saying you got to do them because you got to do them?
Well, I don't agree that, as I said earlier, when you look at a $1.5 billion difference between what the LAO and finance came to as a result of the November and December decisions, you look at the fact the unemployment rate's a little bit down. The May revision is going to provide significant and relevant information about our revenue. And if you chip away, if you go from the $6 billion to 5 to 4 to 3, that lessens the magnitude of the necessary actions by that amount. So why would we make cuts that are going to harm people and harm the economy in March when, in fact, in May, there's a real, not just possibility, but if the trend continues, a probability that that deficit number is going to be less. So, again, this is not the real crunch time, of course, is June and July. And now we go to work preparing for the passage of an on-time budget that is balanced, but we're not going to rush to make any of these decisions, especially on the cut side.
You mentioned values as a Democratic Party.
Yes.
And lawmakers. Do you think this budget represents those values?
I think we share common values with the governor. But these cuts, I've participated in cuts since 2009 that I would never believe I would have participated in, including Prop 63, mental health, things that I've worked on, child welfare. And you do what you have to do, but you don't inflict any more damage unless it's absolutely necessary. So,
does your aversion to the health and welfare and education cuts extend to the triggers as well?
No, well, two things on the triggers. I think the governor's approach to the November 2012 triggers is sound. I think you have to do that. You have to say that if the revenue measure doesn't pass, here will be the consequences. I think we'll want to debate, discuss, and analyze what those trigger cuts should be on the other side, but I have no quarrel with the way the governor approaches the notion of November 2012 triggers. I have a quarrel with upfront cuts in early 2012.
Are you prepared to make those kinds of cuts if the economy doesn't rebound like you're hoping?
Well, we've never shied away from making gut-wrenching decisions because we have an obligation to balance the budget. And so if there is a gap that remains after May, as we get down to our constitutional deadline of June 15th, we will pass a balanced budget.
You mentioned that you don't want to make these cuts, and these cuts may become necessary down the line. Are there other things you'd rather cut than the things the governor has proposed?
No. Don't want to make cuts. Made them. Yeah, you know what? I gave it the office. You look at the numbers, and some of this, numbers can be a little deceiving. Some of this is not cumulative because we don't capture every cut because of lawsuits and especially on the Health and Human Services side. But look at those numbers. 11-12, 11.1 billion, 10-11, 7.8, 9-10, 32.5, 8-9, 11.4. I think the public, and this is what we will see in November, but I think the public is beginning to feel the impact. Certainly college students are feeling the impact. Certainly the 15,000 teachers who were laid off last year have felt the impact. Certainly those most in need have felt the impact. I think, and I think the governor thinks, that the voting public is beginning to recognize that the impact of the cuts have been very real, and that enough is enough. And that, you know, the old cliche about the pendulum swinging too far, I think it needs to swing back. And the public opinion polls are, you know, conflicting in some ways, because we know that people don't want any more cuts. They also don't want to raise taxes. So it's going to be incumbent upon us to, you know, to make an intelligent case, to have a good productive year this year, to do pension reform, to fix or deal with the high-speed rail and the water issues and redevelopment and all the other things that are on the agenda this year, and then take that case to the people in November. But enough bloodletting, enough, you know, enough of making deeper cuts to public investment unless it's absolutely necessary.
You know, the rationale for making the early cuts is you make them early, they have a bigger financial impact. If you wait till later, they lessen, and you have to cut deeper, you have the same financial impact. What's your response to that?
Well, it's a balance, and I understand that if we made $13 billion or $6 billion worth of the cuts tomorrow, that would have a benefit to the state's bottom line. But there's a big price for that. And I'm not, and I don't think my colleagues in the majority here, representing the majority here, are willing to pay that price on behalf of the people we represent.
Go so far as to say you're drawing a line in the sand?
I know, it's a January budget. It's a January budget. So I don't want to, look at, we're a separate branch of government. The governor has said this. He's got his job. We have our job. In the end, we will come together. We are Democrats. We share common values. But we, not doing those cuts early in the year. Should I be a little more clear? I don't know. Anyone want to talk about redevelopment? Anyone want to talk about redevelopment or Kings or new? Okay.
What about giving away all the categorical education?
Haven't had a chance really. You know, my staff here and I, we pride ourselves on being quick studies, but you know, the half-hour notice just we haven't had a chance to really analyze the substantive categorical proposal. I'm aware of it, but I'd rather withhold a little bit of comment. Give me an hour, and I'd be happy to.
What about redevelopment? We've got a couple of days to think about that.
Oh, redevelopment, I have had a couple days to think about it. Couple of comments. Number one, I think those of you who've been around know that I have had a historic concern with the way that the cities and their representatives have dealt on these issues. And Tim, you wrote a very fine column on the history, which I read. I'm a little part of that history, in that in 2003 I suggested that regions share the growth and sales tax. You know, my picture was on most post offices, I think, in most cities throughout California when I suggested that kind of modest proposal. They have, you know, there's been sort of a deliberate political strategy for many years to paint the state as the villain here and the legislature as the villain. And it's not only been untrue. Look at when Prop 13 passed, the state, through AB 8, of course, helped the cities. And we're all part of this, you know, of a broken system. It's not only true, but it's been cynical. And it's been a cynical political strategy that has worked up to a point. And the redevelopment gambit, which was hubris, to one, pass Prop 22, and then file a lawsuit when we saved more than half of redevelopment, has obviously changed the power dynamic. And I, as one leader, am willing to look at and consider and to be creative about giving local government tools to promote economic development, because I actually think redevelopment has done some good and important things. But it's got to be, it'll only happen, especially given the governor's reluctance, if we have partners on the city side that don't view us as the enemy and that are willing to work in partnership. And if they are, I think we can come up with some good solutions. But that's, you know, that's the ball, as they say, is in their court right now.
How would you characterize this? How would you
Interesting. What do you mean?
Well, it's just, I mean, you're facing all these initiatives in November. You've got the tax fight, you've got redistricting, you've got top two, all this new stuff coming up.
It's to me, every year brings new challenges. My touchstone, you hear me say it maybe too much, was 2009. I mean, look, I walked into this job. State was on the verge of collapse. $42 billion deficit. So all this is, those challenges are, I think, all manageable. I think there's a common desire to want to turn that fiscal corner, turn that economic corner, and begin building again. I don't want to spend the rest of my 3 years here doing nothing but holding on. I want to be part of building and rebuilding and focusing on positive, small I initiatives. And we can do that. The open primary is relevant, may be helpful. The redistricting, certainly the way the Senate lines have been drawn by an independent commission, I think reflect the strong Democratic majorities in this state. We'll see what the Supreme Court does with that. So, some view these changes as obstacles. I view some of them as opportunities.
Do you think, you mentioned pensions, do you think you're serious about that in your house and getting
Yes.
the governor or something?
We have to be. I think there's a relationship, actually, between, I agree with the governor, passing a pension reform and our success in November. And we will do that. We're going to analyze and debate and make the right policy, because some of the policies on the far, some of the proposals on the far right, the LAO says, may actually cost the taxpayer more than not. I believe in defined benefit pensions. I believe in strengthening the middle class and not bringing everybody up as opposed to bringing everybody down to a. But they need to be sustainable and affordable at the same time. So that's our task, and we'll go at it.
Forgive me if I missed this before I got here. I know
Yes.
you're saying no, you don't want to make cuts by March, but if you have to make more cuts, what do you think about some of the cuts the governor laid out? For example, the CalWorks, the IHSS, and the like.
Well, I recognize that governing is choices, and there aren't a whole lot of choices, especially with the way the Constitution is written, with all the initiatives piled on. But, it's not, my first place is not to cut the safety net in California. It's not my first place. We've done it because we've had to, but it's not the first place I would look.
Well, what does that leave in this?
Well, that's the fair question. But my point, and I know, Ben, you got a moment ago, the difference between the legislative analysts' revenue numbers in November and the Department of Finance's in December was $1.5 billion to the good. So when you take the $13 billion and break it down, take the $7 billion, the revenue piece off, and you got $6 left. If we have modest economic growth of the kind that at least we saw in November and December, that $6 billion number could shrink, and could shrink considerably. And so that's why I don't think, on top of the human impact and the economic impact, we ought to rush into making more cuts, period. In the end, we'll do the responsible thing, or what we have to do to balance the budget.
Will you move the budget? Will you not do budget hearings then until the May review?
No. We're gonna. That's the other. We're starting right away. We'll analyze the governor's budget. We ought to use the time. I'm not going to wait, but I'm just saying we're not going to use the trigger term. We are not going to make March cuts in CalWorks and childcare of the kind that the governor has laid out. But it's a January budget. That's what he has to lay out a plan. I don't want to over dramatize it. It's January budget, and a June 30th or June 15th budget, by definition, historically looks nothing like a January budget. So that's some context.
That threat of losing 3 weeks out of the school year, do you think that's going to actually push voters towards supporting that?
On the trigger side, I think that, I do think that some people say, well, don't scare the voters. I agree with that, but on the other hand, it is our obligation, the governor's obligation, to inform the voters. And I think that the voters of California do not want to see the school year reduced that dramatically. And that's one of the reasons, among many, why it is essential to pass the governor's revenue measure in November. And maybe that's where I should conclude here. We have some differences in terms of, we're not going to, adopt this January budget, but we are lock solid together on the revenue package for November, and we'll work together to help pass that. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate